So this morning, I want to start by sharing a reading on the four Brahma Viharas or divine abodes that the Buddha taught. We've talked about them in the past, and this is from two fellow Dharma teachers, Caroline Jones and Paul Burrows, and it's called The Four Views or Dimensions to Love. And it goes like this, and it'll cover each of the four. Loving kindness, love that connects, is an antidote to all forms of aversion. It is never attachment. If it slides into sentimentality, compassion brings the heart back into balance. Compassion, love that responds, is an antidote to cruelty. It is never pity. If it slides into sorrow, joy brings the heart back into balance. Appreciative joy, love that celebrates, is an antidote to envy. It is never competitive. If it slides into agitated excitement, equanimity brings the heart back into balance. Equanimity, love that allows, it is an antidote to partiality. It is never indifferent. If it slides into disconnection, loving kindness brings the heart back into balance. I love that reading. I love these practices, but I love that reading because it shows how interconnected the four Brahma Viharas are, how they all kind of support each other. And um, modern psychology, interestingly, has reframed the Brahma Viharas as emotional intelligence. And I've often said that if we practice nothing but the four Brahma Viharas of compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity, and loving kindness, we'd be pretty far along on the path. But today, specifically, I want to focus on appreciative joy, sometimes called sympathetic joy. The Pali word is mudita, M-U-D-I-T-A. And it really means experiencing joy vicariously by rejoicing in the happiness and success of others. The near enemy, if you remember from the Brahma Viharas, the near enemy of each of them is something which masquerades like them. It looks like them, but isn't. And the near enemy of appreciative joy is exuberance, sort of insincere excitement about someone's good fortune. Um, oh, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you, that sort of thing. The far enemy, which is the opposite of the Brahma Vihara, opposite of the practice, is resentment or envy. But unlike envy, for which for which appreciative joy is an antidote, it involves sincere delight in someone else's well-being. And it is a practice which reduces negative emotions and the corresponding suffering that comes from jealousy or envy. It is really an antidote for our self-centeredness, for our ego preoccupation. And it fosters a positive and expansive mindset. But more importantly, it really enhances relationships and deep connection because it promotes genuine happiness for others. It really celebrates others. And how wonderful a gift is that to receive, to have someone to take joy in our own good fortune. As I said a minute ago, it helps rein in the ego by developing a less self-centered perspective. It takes us out of ourselves, which is where we often reside. And it aligns with the Dharma goal of reducing suffering and increasing happiness. It's rarely our default to practice appreciative joy when we hear of another's success. The default is more envy, resentment, jealousy if we're not paying attention. So we need to set an intention to practice it. Most of our pursuit of happiness, if we're honest, is self-centered. It's pretty self-absorbed. And what if we turn that around and focus on the joy and rejoice in others' good fortune? And responding this way opens us up to a range of more skillful alternatives other than the usual ego-focused concerns on which we dwell and spend an awful lot of time. So appreciative joy is the antidote for our usual litany of comparing, being competitive, being envious, keeping up with the Joneses and all of that. And as I said a few minutes ago, by undermining those responses of competitiveness, judging mind, comparing. It deepens our connection to others. It really removes all that, or at least lessens that. I don't know if we can remove it, but we can certainly reduce it. And the practice of choosing joy takes the sting out of hearing or seeing our usual triggers, the things that trigger our jealousy, our envy, our competitiveness. But it's not an easy practice. And let me suggest that to effectively practice it, we need to start with our own experience. By which I mean, if we're bogged down in negative, looping ruminations, not feeling much personal joy, it's going to be really hard to feel joy for others. I mean, we can't do it from a position usually of suffering. Because when we suffer, our default is to feel resentment and envy towards those who are experiencing good fortune or success, or those who appear not to be suffering, or at least suffering as much as we are. It's really hard to wish someone well when we're caught up in our own suffering. Thich Nhat Hanh said, quote, "How can we feel joy for another person when we do not feel joy for ourselves? Joy is for everyone," close quotes. So awakening our own joy, which we've talked about on many occasions, starts with gratitude for all the gifts in our own life. We have to focus on our own gifts. It starts with experiencing awe and wonder about the beauty and mystery of life, which has to be also often an intentional practice. It's why I so often talk about spending time in nature, because I think that's a real way to trigger that awe and wonder. And waking up to our own joy requires that we bring mindful awareness to those things which bring us happiness and joy. We need to pay attention to them. We can't take them for granted. We can't just live on autopilot. Some of you may know of Matthew Ricard. He's a French scientist turned Buddhist monk. He's written a number of wonderful books. One of my favorites of his is called Happiness, in which he talks about three additional facets of joy. The first is rejoicing in someone else's happiness. That's what we're talking about today. The second is delight or enchantment. That's the awe I was talking about. He calls that a shining kind of contentment. And the third one he talks about is spiritual radiance, a serene joy born from deep well-being and benevolence, as he defines it. But we have to open to it. We have to set the intention, even when we're not really feeling like it. I mean, sometimes we have to be intentional about opening to joy, opening to awe, opening to wonder. Because when we turn towards joy for ourselves and others, we shift the narrative in our minds. We tap into different emotions other than the typically negative ones. Remember, as Rick Hansen reminds us again and again, we are Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive, because we evolve that way. It is necessary for survival. So we're really always pushing back against that evolutionary pattern that we all carry around. But by doing so, joy becomes a path back to pleasure that's always there in the present moment if we focus on it. So let me share a couple of practical tools for appreciative joy, for how to engage with it. And we begin by, during a quiet time, maybe before our sit or after our sit, just reflecting on the question, what brings me joy? Just sit with that. Wait for the answer to arise. We're going to do that in a little bit in a minute when we sit. Recognize it. Feel it into the body. There, we're back to the body that we talked about the other day. What brings me joy? Note whatever arises. Note the blessings that come to mind. Note the things for which we're grateful that comes to mind. We recognize it and then we repeat again. What brings me joy? We keep repeating this question while reflecting on it. It's a very intentional practice. And I find that if I'm in a crummy mood and I sit with this for a few minutes, it really can shift my whole outlook. It creates spaciousness, and it just gets me out of that looping, ruminative misery that is so easy to fall into. And we keep reflecting on the ordinary and extraordinary occurrences that bring us joy. We give ourselves permission to feel good, which is sometimes not easy to do. We see all the gifts in our lives, the things we too often take for granted. I mean, so many gifts that we just sort of assume we're entitled to or whatever. But in fact, much of the world does not have these same gifts. We pick an individual. This is where appreciative joy comes in. We pick an individual or group to which we can direct our appreciative joy. And one example that came to mind when I was putting my thoughts together is, can we feel that appreciative joy toward fellow Sangha members and take joy in the reduced suffering that we've all experienced by being on this path? Can we just celebrate each other's progress and reduce suffering on the path? And I love that because it brings it into our community. So finally, in closing, let me say that appreciative joy is not just about happiness. It's also about valuing and appreciating the good qualities that people have, that each of us have, that bring us our own happiness. So we value and celebrate. So that's appreciative joy, one of the four heavenly abodes, divine abodes that the Buddha taught. Let me stop there.